one of the things that I see a jarring kind of there's a juxtaposition, and I find it a hard one to square. It's a square peg round hole situation. Almost always the passion for the service, and the passion for driving excellence, and the passion and belief in, this is something that we should sell upon. That always comes from a service leader, from the service division. It doesn't come outside of that. And I know we've made a lot of ground across the last 5 years or so in terms of breaking down silos, and we talk about that all the time, with the importance of data transferring. But that belief, that passion, that's the word, the passion. It sits with the service leader, and all too often the marketing department will sit elsewhere. There'll be
That's right.
a centralized organization, and so I see this time and time again. There is a disconnect between where the story is, and I'm a big believer in kind of understanding the logos, the pathos, the ethos, and making sure that mix is there within the marketing messaging. But that's a skill set. But that all of the real stuff that creates that story that will sell it, that's kept within the service organization, and that skill set doesn't often come into interaction.
Yeah,
And there's
100%.
I mean, is that something? Do you think that's the most fundamental bit that a lot of service organisations are missing? Is that communication between the service leadership and the marketing leadership?
Yeah, if they're really run as a true profit center or strategic line of business, they'd have their own marketing resources, but they don't for some reason. It's in corporate marketing or in product marketing, and let's face it, there's not. If you're doing most of your job is on product marketing, you tend to lose that edge, that competitive advantage and knowledge you have about what makes services great and how to market services. I don't know what it's like in business school now, but I know when I was in business school, they didn't teach anything about service marketing. It was all product. So there's this kind of like product bias, product mentality when it comes to marketing services that these service companies need to have. These divisions need to really have, a champion in their company that, telling the story about services.
Yeah, it's interesting because we look at some of the biggest most successful brands in the world, and the one of them that comes to mind is Apple. And Apple is one of the few examples of an organization that has actually understood the value of service. I mean, I don't get me wrong, the product is fantastic, and this isn't a plug. I work in media. I have to have, for a lot of the video product editing work we do, it's industry standard. But the bit that I always see in Apple is the Genius Bar. I thought, without a pun, I mean, that's such a clever move. If you look at the pricing realistically compared to Tom's Hardware down the road, it's astronomical compared to. But we buy into the expertise. We buy into that nicely branded store. And that can translate so much in field service. You buy into the subject matter expert. It's the van that's parked up at the front. Tony Chapman, the UK general manager for Siemens, he explained this to me really well. He said, I make sure my engineers, and I've done this, and he's a very senior gentleman in that organisation, and again, he's got that kind of made that way up those ladders. He's saying, I've done this ever since I was a service manager. One of the first things you say is, make sure you park your van at the front.
Make sure little things, yeah.
Make sure that make sure the engineers are smart, make sure they're early, make sure all of those little things. He said, because that's service marketing as well, because that's saying we will deliver a better layer of service. But so
we call that the warm and fuzzies. We used to call that the warm and fuzzies.
Say again, sorry.
We used to refer to that as the warm and fuzzies.
Yeah.
If you give a nice service experience, they'll come back for more.
And it's the
but you mentioned something before about about Apple and being more market oriented, and we're seeing that transition occur. But I think why there's been so much of a lag and why services is behind the rest of the organization is historically that service operation was perceived as not having a big economic value. Didn't
Yeah.
contribute a lot of economic value to the firm. If you think of the theory of the firm, and what is service? For many years there was a lot of guys sitting around for a service event to occur, and the service event suggested there was something wrong with the product. So it
Yeah.
took a while for people to see service as a proactive way of pulling through more product sales.
Yeah,
But
it's
that was
interesting because that's something I was going to ask about. I mean, is that one of the big challenges? Do we still have that stigma that you don't promote the service because at the same time your messaging is saying that the product's going to fail,
yeah,
and
I'm still running into it.
we're still trying to live
20,
in under this. It's a what's the word? It's this great kind of myth, I suppose, that we're still trying to perpetuate some 30
and
years on that nothing's
that's
right.
right.
That's
2021, I'm still hearing that.
yeah, yeah, and so I suppose. Well, I mentioned servitization a wee bit earlier, and that's an area that I've been quite heavily involved with a lot of the academics and done a ton of different kind of interviews and studies and written quite a few pieces on there. Um, is that going to be a catalyst? Because one of the things that I'm thinking here from what you're saying is for service organisations, manufacturers in particular, to get their head around service marketing, it needs to be driven from the top. Unless you've got a particularly vocal service leader within the organisation, and there are many, and I know a lot of greats that would take that route. But equally, for every one of those real true leaders, there's going to be the rest of the pack that may not put their hand up and say, "Look, we need to shout about this." Does it need to be driven from the top? And do you think, I'm going to put two questions to you at the same time, so I apologise, but does it need to be driven from the top to get service marketing right? And secondly, do you think that something else that's driven from the top, the shift towards advanced services and more strategic thinking around service as a revenue generator, do you think that will naturally kind of make people wake up about the fact that they could really start switching on to service marketing?
Yeah, two very interesting questions. So the first one, does it have to be driven from the top? Well, it depends. It depends if that service executive sees himself as a leader, willing to raise his hand or fight the battle internally to beef up the marketing. But eventually, though, even that leader, even the strongest of leaders in the service organization, does have to get the buy-in from the CEO. So in a way, yes, they need to be either be driven from the top or be able to influence the top echelons of leadership to support and invest in the marketing of the service organization. And now your second question, yes, I believe that I agree that the servitization trend will put more resources and emphasis on the marketing, but the jury's still out. I don't, it's still very new, but whether it's still going to be product driven, is the service team going to be brought in like after the fact, after they decided to go in this direction, and now they're doing workshops to implement it, or are they going to be brought in in the early stages and even own the marketing?
Is it do you think we'll see some kind of just again thinking off the top of my head here? Do you think that we'll see the hybrid? So it'll no longer be service marketing or product marketing, but solution focused marketing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
something we can expect
yeah.
to see.